Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Kerner. I'm head of mobile, and just going to talk this afternoon about a few things to do with mobile apps and kind of where they're all going and how to actually do various things with them and how to make them as one part. But to start off with, I'm going to look at a history lesson of how this whole app economy came around and how it all started, and then the actual market explosion of how these apps came about. And I've put Apple in brackets there because they were kind of a bit of a catalyst with this whole thing. The growth of the competition, in particular Android, and how that's really shot up its market share recently, and how it shouldn't really be discounted when thinking about which one do we develop for. Do we do iPhone or do we do Android? It should really kind of, you'll see the numbers basically about how that could influence your decision. Then some new features of basically what's coming out and what's available. And then actually making and obviously selling these apps and the options available to you if you're ever thinking of possibly doing an app or you've done an app and want to see what else is available. So first of all, let's go back in time and have a look at the kind of the history of where all this stuff came from. So we jump back to 1999, and obviously there was phones before this. They were quite large, some of them. And as time progressed, they actually changed in design, and the early ones basically had these little small screens, mono green type screens. And then as we jumped through, the years, they got colourful, which was nice. And then when we got to around about 2007, Apple announced the iPhone. And then everything started to look very similar. We end up with these big, large screen phones with some of them, obviously now still have keyboards on, but the majority of them, smartphones, are just these big displays, which we can install our own applications onto. And that's basically kind of where we're up to now. And obviously, Apple and Samsung have had a big punch-up recently about who did what first, and you copy my design, all this type of thing. But essentially, this is kind of what they all look like now. So how do we get from having these basic phones, and here's a nice 3330, if anyone remembers those, with a great browser on it, and you could do lots of stuff, to having this whole ecosystem of all these nice modern app stores? And it was a development more to do with the technology within the phones that allowed us to do this. And obviously the hardware got better over time as well as technology progressed, and we ended up with faster processors and better screens and all these kind of extra things. But mobile browsers was really where this kind of thing kind of kicked off. Like Tom mentioned in the previous presentation, we did have these early web browsers where they could load a basic list of links and text, and we could see stuff if we went into a mobile site. But it wasn't really the same as if we were on a desktop site. The technology wasn't really there in that mobile browser. And I've put Apple in brackets because when they released the iPhone, they released Mobile Safari, which is a very kind of full-featured mobile browser which came with the iPhone and rendered websites very well on those devices. And they looked and loaded like proper desktop sites. And I've also put developers in brackets as well because obviously without the developers making things, we wouldn't really get to where the app stores are now, because otherwise we'd just be stuck with the things that the manufacturers decide to ship with the phones. So this kind of market kind of exploded with all these apps and these app stores coming out. And when the iPhone was announced in June of 2007 at a developers conference, Steve Jobs was on stage and basically said, well, you can make stuff for this phone as well, but you've got to do it in the browser. The whole idea of apps and installing apps and app stores wasn't really out then. And basically said, well, you've got this excellent browser Safari, and you can access things within the phone. You can access you could link off to a Google map. You can make a call, you could send an email if you wanted to, so you could make these kind of these web apps essentially because they run through their browser. And I made one in 2008. I made a TV guide in January. Basically it pulled in a feed of shows, and you had all the freebie channels, and it looked up the current time and then basically said, well, this is on now, this is coming up next. But it doesn't work anymore. Don't try and find it because it's all dead and gone. But essentially I did make one, and it worked, and it was on Apple's web app directory, and you could go to it on your phone and you have a portable TV guide wherever you were. But I just found that screenshot somewhere on the web somewhere. So how do we get from web apps to having all these apps that we can now install on our phones? Well, one kind of little part of this puzzle which is could influence how they started is kind of the jailbreaking scene. Now, if you're not familiar with this is the idea of people basically not really liking the fact that Apple have tied them in so much in their own little, and Apple have got this little jail where you can only do stuff that only you can do in there, and they kind of want to break out of that and do what they want. And this whole jailbreaking idea came around with a bunch of hackers and developers and coders that wanted to try and let their phones do more things, essentially, and more than what Apple let them do. And this was one of the ways of actually doing that. It was a system called Jailbreak Me, which basically took various security exploits that are on the phone and hacked it a bit, and then you can install your own stuff. It voided your warranty, and obviously Apple are not really going to help you after that point, but it did mean you can install various things and change bits that Apple didn't let you do. And it is still around kind of today. You can try and jailbreak the new iPhones and do various other bits. But essentially that let you install apps, and that was an early way of installing apps on the phones and doing other things with them. So what did Apple do as a response to this? Well, 1 year later, after they kind of said you can do stuff in the browser, they basically released the App Store and said, well, now you can install your own apps and you can make them. We've got this great development kit and you can go and download that and people can make apps. And they launched the App Store in 2008 with 500 apps that they'd already partnered up with various people, like eBay and Facebook and some big names in the online world. But since then, it's basically exploded into having massive downloads. And we're just looking at the App Store here, but obviously it's a similar situation with the other stores. Now along the bottom we've got time, and we're starting in July 2008 and we've gone to April this year. On the far side it's the available apps in thousands, so we're approaching 600,000, and it's probably over that now. And we've got billions of downloads on this side. And you can see they're both growing pretty quickly. And there's little steps in the graph there at certain points, and that's probably where new devices came out, like the iPad and iPod Touch and updates to the iPhone, where new people got introduced to that idea and went and invested in apps and got hooked to the idea of getting them. So that's obviously Apple, but we can't really forget about the competition, especially the rise of Android, of how this has come around. And we've also got BlackBerry and Windows 8 still doing their thing as well. But Android basically is an interesting one. And this market changes very, very quickly. Before Android was around, obviously there was other mobile phones, there was other smartphones. But jumping back 2 years, this is the smartphone operating system share for smartphones. And we have all the kind of the big names here. Now this large blue chunk is Symbian, and Nokia, a lot of Nokia devices were powered by the Symbian OS. And there are a few others as well, but Nokia was their biggest customer. And we've got 18% now, that's Android, and at 17 is Apple with its iOS system. And remember, this is a couple of years after the iPhone came out, so they're sitting there with a decent share of the market. But jumping now, Symbian has shrunk to 3, and Android has 65. So when we're always thinking about which app do we do first, sometimes why are we only targeting 20% of the market when other people have got 65% share with Android devices? So you can always kind of look at it and think, well, let's do Android first or let's do iOS first and kind of make a decision on that. But putting these numbers behind it kind of really sets the scene of how many Android devices are actually available and out there. And a bit of a kind of statistic for you. There's more activations of Android devices than there are babies born in the world. It's around about 360,000 daily births and around about 1.3 million Android devices activated daily. So there's a massive growth area of Android devices, and obviously that's tablets and smartphones, so it's growing rapidly. And this was back in September, he said this, so it's a few months ago, so it's probably even more now, with these devices being activated, so it's a massive growth area. But we can't really forget about Windows Phone and BlackBerry, because obviously they're still around and they're still doing their bits and pieces, and they want to play kind of, not playing catch up, but still release new handsets and try and keep up with the market of what it's doing. So we've got Windows 8 Phone, which obviously was released at the end of October, the new phone operating system with this nice kind of tile look to it, with all these little squares of information which you can change. And the Nokia Lumia was kind of a big thing on TV at the minute. You might have seen the advert with that phone. And that's a Windows 8 mobile powered phone. And on this side, this is a screenshot of BlackBerry 10. And this is actually coming out at the end of January. And they've got a special event where they're going to announce a couple of handsets. And they're going for this kind of full screen touch approach with things which they've done on a few of their previous handsets, but they're basically changing the way that the system works. And a lot of corporate users love BlackBerry because it is so simple, but also so fast and easy to use and secure for their email. So hopefully they're not going to lose too much market share, or perhaps maybe gain some market share back from Android and iOS by releasing this new system. But only time will tell, and we'll just have to see what BlackBerry announce. So that's where obviously kind of the big names in the operating system kind of market for smartphones. But in terms of features, obviously they're updating this stuff all the time. And in particular, we looked at iOS and Android because they're the majority players in the market. So what have they done recently for this? The hardware's getting better, the screens are getting better, the phones are getting faster. So they want to kind of allow the software to change as well to let you do things on these phones. So on the latest versions, we have iOS 6 and Android 4.2, which was announced recently. And there's a few new things, and I've kind of highlighted the key ones here that have come out. Now, a big one on iOS 6 was the maps change. They got rid of Google and they went to their own solution. Some people liked it, some people hated it, a load of people got lost, and that's basically kind of what they where they're going with it. They're trying to fix all their maps. But at the end of the day, if you're on OS 6, you're using Apple's map solution, so that's what's available for that. There's also Passbook, which I'll come back to, because that's quite an interesting one. They've built in Facebook into the app, into the apps as well. Now, you had Facebook on your phone before, and you could share with Facebook if you wanted to, but now it's actually a lot easier to integrate that into your own applications. So you can get this kind of viral marketing and sharing idea straight out quite quickly. You can also connect into the central reminder system on the phone. So if you develop an app or you have an idea for an app and you want to put a reminder on someone's phone, all those reminders are going to be in their reminders app centrally on that phone as well. So they don't have to worry about, where have I saved this thing? It's just going to go in their reminder to-do list. On Android 4.2, they've got an interesting feature to do with user accounts. So if you have a tablet device at home, and you share it between different members of the family, perhaps kids or other halves and things, and you want to set it up a certain way and use the apps you want to use, you can now set up user accounts on these devices. And we don't have to do anything for our apps to actually make them work. They're just going to work within each user account that we set up. But it's an interesting feature that Apple haven't got yet, because they basically know that people share devices between different users in the home. There's various browsing enhancements and some new camera features as well, but also this interesting presentation or wireless window kind of idea. And what this means is that you can make an app that then has a second screen support built in, and you can have a different output on that second screen. So perhaps if you're building something to, a little presentation tool, or perhaps something else you were going to run with and you wanted to show something different on that second screen, you can now do that within Android 4.2. But an interesting point with these operating system updates is if the manufacturers release these changes, how quickly does the user actually go and update their phone? Now with iOS, it's a lot quicker actually than Android. And this is mostly due to Apple just pushing those updates out worldwide, all in one go. And obviously you get an update in iTunes or on your phone saying there's a new version and you can update it. Now with Android, the story is a little bit different because Google make Android. And then other manufacturers like Samsung and HTC come along and take a version of it and customize it and put it on their devices. So when a new version comes out that Google have made, Samsung are going to have to go and adapt their version and then make sure everything they've customized it with still works and then release it to the users of those platforms. So there's a little bit of delay in getting these features out there that, from Android. But it's pretty quick. Around about 25% of the Android market users out there are using version 4 or above. So if you want to target these people with these newer devices, there's still a decent chunk, and the majority are on an earlier version. But still, the uptake isn't too bad. So I mentioned Passbook earlier on, and what this is a way of digitally storing a lot of things that you normally had, that you normally carry around with you, such as tickets, loyalty cards, gift cards, this kind of thing, and storing them in your phone. And this is an American kind of screenshot here, so we've got a flight ticket in the middle. And you can basically store things instead of carrying them around and printing them and put them on your phone. Now, is anyone using this in the UK? Because it always seems to be that the Americans kind of latch onto everything first and go and produce lots of things. Now, Harvester are using it in the UK. You go on their mobile site, and there's a little Add to Passbook button down the bottom corner. So if you've got a coupon code, and this is an offer for £5 off when you spend 30 quid, you can then download that into your Passbook on your phone and take your phone with you to the actual branch. This one's actually expired, but you can actually have the coupon with you instead of having to print stuff out and then carry that along. But it can also be used for loyalty cards and store cards. So this is a Starbucks system, and you've got the balance displayed at the top corner there. And the EPOS system in the store can just scan that barcode and update the balance, and it's all kind of handled within your phone. And that's quite a useful feature, and the way you can make these, and that's just an iOS 6 exclusive thing at the moment, and hopefully the uptake with companies around the UK and the US is obviously going to improve. There are obviously other apps that can do these kind of digital tickets. There's various train ticket apps in the UK that you can do this already with, but this is a central way of getting everything in one place. So I'm going to talk about kind of making and actually selling the apps now. How do we actually go around putting one of these things together if we decided we wanted to do it? But before we do that, we need to have a look at what it actually is, a native app versus a web app. Now, we did that survey at the start, and a lot of you kind of were pretty clued up about this thing already, but we'll just show you a little screenshot here. So on the far side we have, well, this is Waitrose obviously, and on the far side we have a mobile website of Waitrose, and on this side we have a native app of Waitrose, a native app. Now, initially they look pretty similar. You've got the same branding, same colours, some imagery, some nice pictures that they've set up there for offers. But there are a few differences of how these things work. Now, at the bottom of the mobile app, we've got this bar that's always available on mobile sites, and that has our back, forward, navigation, all the usual things that we'd have in a browser. And it has to load basically by us opening up Safari, typing in the address and letting it load. And now with the app, obviously, once you've installed that app, it's just there and you can open it and off it goes. But we have got this common tab bar type thing that we see on a lot of iPhone apps that a lot of the users are familiar with. And that's pretty consistent, so your user experience is quite easy, and the learning curve is quite quick for users to pick these things up. So how are these actually written? Well, there's a lot of languages behind the scenes with this stuff for different platforms. And these are a few of them on the screen here. But essentially what this means is if we want to build an app, we want to get it into the hands of our users, but we don't know what phone they're going to be on. So we might have to make this app 3 or 4 times. We might have to make it for iOS, then go make an Android one. And then now Windows Mobile is out, we need to make a new one for that. And obviously we could kind of forget about BlackBerry if obviously no users here had it, but if they did, we might want to make a BlackBerry app as well and put it on all these stores. But it does mean building these things all the time. So we need to decide which one do we do first. And like we've seen, a lot of people, and we have this in our own experience as well, is that people like to do iOS first. But why is that? Well, here's some numbers of some apps. And there's more paid apps in the App Store, but there's more free apps in Google Play. And a lot of people come to the conclusion that if you make an iOS app, it monetizes better. So there's kind of more a quick return on the investment and more profit to be made on this one. And there's lots of kind of paid apps in this store that kind of reflects that. So if you want to sell things, you go where everyone else is selling things because that's working for them. So what about the users? iPhones are quite expensive, so does that mean that iPhone users have more money? Well, possibly. And this was a survey that was done by a website, hunch.com, which had a survey of about 15,800 of their users. And there's a bit of an interesting split here. iOS, 18% more likely to be women. Women like to shop. Does that mean they buy more? Possibly. My wife does all the time. So there's that kind of stat there. Like to have visited more than 5 countries, whereas Android users possibly have never 71% more likely to never travelled outside their native country. So I don't know whether that applies to the users in the room here, but it's an interesting kind of take on this split between can we make more money off iOS users. But we can't really, we're talking about paid apps here, but what about free apps? Obviously, if we're just making a free app and want to get it into the hands of the users, we still want to put it in the store that makes us, gets us the most coverage. And putting it in the App Store on iTunes is kind of one central place for users to go to, and they can just discover these new apps and download them and install them on their phones. With Android, the market is a little bit more fragmented for the users. So if they have if you've recently bought a Samsung, Galaxy device or perhaps an HTC, you might have a shortcut to the Google Play Store, but you might also have a shortcut to the Samsung App Store, and you're not really sure where do I go get my apps from. Could I go get it from here? Could I get it from somewhere else? So this fragmentation of the market is a little bit difficult for some users to actually go and find stuff, whereas obviously Apple is one place they can go on their phone or on their desktop and they end up at the same point. So perhaps the distribution is a little bit easier for iOS devices. So which one do we do first? Well, we've got all these choices. We've looked at iOS and Android in detail, but which one, is there a way of doing all of them in one go? Well, there could be. We could use something like PhoneGap. Now, PhoneGap is a way of making apps using the same code that we've built our normal website with. So we've got HTML, and we've got JavaScript, and we've got CSS that we talked about in the previous presentation. So we could take that and make an app with it. And PhoneGap basically translates between our nice HTML code that all our web developers know to something that apps can understand in those languages we saw earlier on. We don't have to worry about that bit. We're just going to basically do the bit we know and let it take care of the rest. And it has a few advantages. Obviously, like I said, we can use HTML to make these apps. We can access the phone's features, so we can still access the GPS, we can access the camera, we can still make a fully functioning app or a relatively fully functioning app with certain capabilities. And because we make an app, we can put it on the stores. If we just left it as a mobile app, we'd have to communicate that address out to someone. They'd have to go on it, and especially if we want to charge for it, there's not really a kind of centralized mobile payment kind of system. There are various options, but putting it in a store is a lot easier to put a price tag on it if you wanted to. But even if you were doing a free app, it's one central place where people can find your apps. And I'll give you a quick demo of that now. So what I've got here is Apple's development program called Xcode, and this basically makes apps. But this this kind of bit of a screen here shows some code, and don't really worry about what it does. But essentially, what our app would do, let's say we have a chocolate shop, and we want to get people to come into our chocolate shop, and we want to basically get our name out there a bit more. So we thought, oh no, we'll do an app. And we get the app on the App Store, people can install it, and then when they get to our store, they can check in with their location, share it on the social networks, which then tells all their friends that they're at this chocolate shop and gets our brand name out there. And as a reward for that, we'll give them some offers. We'll give them some voucher codes, some coupons. And we can build an app for that and get it on the store. So I'm just going to run this in the simulator that comes with this Xcode program here. And it'll load our app up, and here's our app running on the phone. And it's not a web app, I haven't had to go to an address, we can just put this on the store and we can bundle it off. And we've got our nice branding at the top and a big check-in button. So we can press that, and there's a few things that we need to access on the phone here. We need to access the GPS, we need to get a location and then send that off. Now I haven't actually made the social network bit work, but we'll kind of just forget about that bit for the time being. We'll just assume that it's going to post it off to Twitter and Facebook. So when the user comes along, they're going to press check-in, and I've dumped the coordinates out here and it says 37 and minus 122. Not sure where that is, but basically it's getting a location and it's bringing us some offers. So we've made this app that we can just make with normal HTML and JavaScript from the same code we make our websites with. Obviously customized to fit on this screen a little bit, but the idea is the same behind it. So that surely is a good way of making apps, because we don't really have to learn another language for programming. We can just basically make this app up if we wanted to. So how does it actually work? Well, what it does is it loads a thing called a web view. And what this is basically a browser. It takes all that code and runs it in a browser, but it's wrapped up as an app, so we can put it on the App Store and stick a price on it, or put it on or make it free. And web views are great because we can just run all this HTML and all this other code within it. But the problem is they're not really that smooth for lots of content. So we have our app here with our nice front-end look and feel to it, and we have our content all wrapped up. But there's still a bit of a problem here, because although that we can make this quite easily, it's not a very fluid experience for the user. Especially lots of imaging and lots of imagery and lots of scrolling. It doesn't really kind of respond that well, especially on different devices. We could take all that code we had in Xcode there, all that HTML, all that JavaScript, literally copy and paste it into an Android PhoneGap project and run it, and it'll run on an Android phone. But it might not run as smoothly. We'd have the same look and feel, and that'd be great, but the user experience might not be as good because we can't leverage the full capabilities of the phone. They might not have the hardware acceleration and the nice scrolling that we have, the smooth transitions we have between screens that we get, where it does that nice push effect and various little features like that. And we also have a few other issues as well. We've got updating the app. If the content's bundled within it, then we need to change the app every time we update our content. We have to push a new version out to the store and then wait for users to update it. Now on the survey earlier, a lot of you did keep your phones up to date, which is good because that kind of goes against this point. But if you didn't update your phones, we wouldn't know when we were actually going to get that new feature out to the user. And then there's a question of features. We can leverage, like I said, the GPS and the maps and the camera and all sorts of other features. But if Apple invented a new feature on their phones that we wanted to get into and use, we could only do it if PhoneGap let us do it. We can't just kind of go and tap into that straight away. Now there could be a plugin available for it, but if there isn't, we're still a bit stuck because we can't take advantage of it. So what if there's a better way of doing things? Well, if we've got our website at the moment, we might have a content management system for it up there, which is a CMS. And we could provide something called a web service, which essentially is a bridge between our and our content management system. And that sends the content down to the phone. So we could then send our app off to the world, people can install it, but it does let us change that content remotely and update that app as and when we need to. But we can also add some extra stuff in here as well. We can use some native user interface elements on this. Now what I mean by that is the look of the app and how it feels is very similar to other apps that we have installed on our phone. So rather than loading everything in a web view, we can just load the little bit in the middle, the content area we need, and make the top bar perhaps look like a native app and put a tab bar on it as well, and do some other things to make it look a bit more like any other app you use on your phone. So this approach we kind of call a hybrid approach. It's got this native feel to it, and it's got this web content updating that we can do. So what this would look like, we still have our web view in the middle, and we have our little nice tab bar, which we saw in the Waitrose app earlier on, and we might have a little bar at the top, and it's starting to look like a proper iPhone app now. Now, I'll show you this as a quick demo as well. So what we have is our same, well, we've got a different app now this time. What we've got is we've got our chocolate shop, and we're going to load our app in the simulator here. Now this is basically going to communicate to our CMS, our content management system, hopefully, when the Wi-Fi works. Essentially, it will load the content in there in a moment. There we go. And we've got some products in here, and we've got our tab bar down the bottom, and we've got our nice little bar at the top, and we've got some prices and some products in here, and that's great. But what if we send this off and we suddenly think, oh, we're going to have a special offer promotion on it. It's Christmas. We're going to reduce the chocolates. We're going to push some nice some deals out to people. So we need to actually let them know about that. So if I just close out the simulator here, and I go to my content management system, which obviously doesn't look like this in real life. This is a kind of a shortcut way I'm doing it just to demonstrate it. And I'm going to apply my change here. So we've gone and changed our prices. And we're going to go back and run the app again. And I haven't had to change anything in the app. I haven't had to do anything in Xcode. We've basically relaunched the app, and now it looks completely different because we've changed something in our content management system that communicates to the app and then shows our new detail. And we've got a deal at the day, which I've robbed off Thornton's if anyone really goes on that site and recognises that image. And I've reduced some prices. So basically, our chocolate shop, we can update remotely. And we can get this new content down to the users without having to keep shipping off new versions. So surely that is the kind of the ideal way of doing things, because we can update stuff and we can communicate it to the users. So does it solve the problem? Well, kind of. But we've still got the web view. It's still not as smooth as it could be. We've still got the same problems we had with PhoneGap. Even though we've made it look a bit nicer, we've still got that kind of possibly slowness and responsiveness. And you notice the design didn't really look like any other apps in that middle bit. It just looked like a mini website loaded in the middle. And Facebook had this problem. And recently, a couple of months ago, they rewrote their entire app. They changed it from having a web bit, which loads all your content in that big news feed, with all these nice images. And they were using HTML for that, like they powered their main website with. And they changed it all to a native app because they found that the user experience wasn't really great, especially between different devices that have varying technical specifications. And the users found that especially scrolling was very, very slow. And their previous app had a really low rating on the App Store because it was so slow. It's only 1.5 stars out of a possible 5. But then they rewrote it and they re-released it. And now it's up to 4 stars, and all the reviews are quite positive. But they also found that it was twice as fast. And being twice as fast, it meant they could consume, in the same amount of time, the users, twice as much content, which means you can sell them more things in that same period of time, in that engagement time. So you can get more stuff out to them. But Facebook like to, one of the downsides of this is they really like to push updates out. They think of new ideas all the time, and they like to push that feature out. By doing it, by using the kind of native coding methods and not using HTML, they couldn't really do that. But embedding HTML5 in an app isn't what people expect, and this is from their product manager for iOS said this, and he's kind of right. If you want an app, you want it to look and feel like other apps on your phone, and by loading stuff through a web view, although it's one approach, it might not suit the idea or the concept you want to be able to do. So is there a better way of doing this? Well, there kind of is, and this gets a little bit technical. And this is called a server-driven interface, and the idea with this is that you have your CMS and you have your content, but could we send that down to the phone in a way that it's presented and displayed on the phone that uses the native views that we're used to if we're on those devices? So if we're on an iOS phone, an iPhone, and we're looking at something, we want it to look like other iPhone apps, but we want to try and use that same code and take it and use it on an Android device and load something we're familiar with on Android, and then get all the benefits of those speed that by doing that, doing that approach uses. And we can have a common web service, so it's a lot easier behind the scenes managing this stuff if we have one system to worry about instead of 4, 5, or even 6 if a new phone comes around that works slightly differently. So how does this work? Well, same idea as before. We have our content management system, and we have our web service, and we have our content. And we're going to send this down to various bits of rendering code within our apps. And this basically says, well, when I get this content and I'm on an iPhone, we're going to display the controls we're used to loading on an iPhone. If we're on Android, we're going to basically display that content for stuff that looks like Android devices. And then all the users are instantly familiar with that, and they use the app, and they get all the speed improvements and all the native features that we could have. Then we could add new platforms on. So when Windows 8 comes out, we could take our same content and our same system that we've already built once and just change some code here to just display that content for those users on those phones. And this brings some other advantages as well. We could manage different versions. So maybe at some point we release a version 2 of our app that has some new features, but there might still be some people using version 1. So we don't want to be able to send them maybe a feature or a link to a button if their phone can't do it. So we can take that into account when we load these views. Are they on version 1? Are they on version 2? Do they have this feature available? And that leads on to device features. So if we're on an iPod Touch, we can't make calls, but if we're on an iPhone, we can. So do we show a call button or not? And then we can have a common backend for our native apps and our web apps. So everything is in one place. So people without smartphones can still get to the same content by using the same system. And it's one source to update, and it does avoid having to release updates frequently. And you might think, and you might think that this is kind of a cool idea, but it's not a new idea. It's been around for a couple of years. Apple actually suggested this in 2010 at a developers conference. They basically said, well, you can make these interfaces and load them remotely and then display them on the devices you want. And they were talking about it in the sense that if you're on an iPad or on an iPod or on an iPhone, but we can take this and develop it and say, well, if you're on an Android or a Windows or an iOS device, then you can basically kind of use their idea and twist a little bit and use it for different platforms. So here's a little snippet of code. And essentially what this is like a dictionary in a way. We have some titles down the side and then some definitions. So a view type, it's a list. We have a title and it's search results. And we have some products. And for the technical people in the audience, you might see that as JSON code. It's not my name, it's not got an A in it, it's just JSON, if you get that at all, sorry. We have some prices. And essentially we can send this down to our phone. So if we display this on our devices, if we're on an Android, we can display a list type look, which looks like all the other lists that we can do on our phones and Android apps. If we're on an iOS phone, we can make it look like a normal scrolling list like we have in our Contacts app. And if we're on a mobile browser, we can make it display how we want because it's essentially we can format that data into HTML and develop it. So we can use that same content and then have something in these phones that says display it like this, and we can send the same message to all the phones, which means we can update it. So surely that's the best way of doing it. If we've got central content, we've got lots of devices, we don't know the devices, we want to communicate this data down, is that the best route to take? Well, this chart, even though it's quite heavy and there's a lot of data on here, kind of explains this. So along the top, we've got our various ways of doing things, starting from web app to a server-driven, full-blown setup. And down the side, we have the benefits or kind of downsides for doing things those particular ways. So if we're doing a web app, we can update that content because it's all in one place, and we can get that out, and that's great. But we can't put it on the store. We've got no store presence with that. We can't get it on the App Store or get it on Google Play because it's not technically an app. It's just loaded in the browser. With the other methods of doing it, we can put it in the store. Is it the fastest way? Not really, because we can't really take into account anything on the phone that we can use. So these kind of native hybrid server-driven routes are the fastest. Can we access all the new operating system features? Well, in a web app, we can't because we're not actually on the phone. We're running in a browser. Whereas if we're doing native or this kind of hybrid approach, we can possibly access more stuff. Adding devices with web apps is really easy because they just go to a browser. But with this native-only approach, you might have to rewrite the app again, or maybe develop our system to take into account that new app. So there are kind of trade-offs with doing one versus another. But what it might come down to is cost and development time. These hybrid or server-driven routes might be a long way of doing things, but in the long term, it does give you that ability to update your app remotely, but it might cost a bit more. And then system updates, basically, at the bottom here. And this is what Facebook came back to. They love kind of thinking of new crazy stuff to put in their apps. So when they had it as a web-based kind of view, they just changed their code and sent it down to the app, and you instantly get this new feature. But what if we were doing things natively? Well, we might have to push out a new version of the app, and then people have to update it. And if we're doing a hybrid one, depending on what that feature was, we might be able to push that out instantly. So there are kind of trade-offs depending on what you want to do. So what do we do when we're doing stuff? If we have a client that says, well, I want an app, this is my idea, this is what I wanted to do. Well, on our scale of things, with going from kind of web app up to server-driven, we tend to sit around here, where the native kind of hybrid approach And that basically is because the user experience on the phones is better, and we like kind of producing applications that the users will get a good experience with, and it's a high quality kind of product at the end of the day. We could do it all as web apps, which is essentially what the seminar voting app was that we demoed earlier on to you. That was running in a browser, and we did that because we didn't know what phone you were going to have, and also it was a good way of getting that out and running seamlessly between all the browsers and communicating that data back to our nice view here. We could have done it as an app, but like I said, we didn't know what phones you had, so we might have to build that multiple times. We could do a server-driven route for that, but it might have taken a lot. And seeing it's just a seminar, we weren't going to invest that much money. So we basically went down the web app route. And that's basically it. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions.